Point of order, the Honourable Member Grant Robertson.
Mr Speaker, I didn't interrupt Dr Norman's speech because I didn't think that was fair, but the Attorney-General used an extremely unparliamentary comment, a word that has been ruled out numerous times. I'm not going to repeat it. He knows what it was in reference to the Leader of the Labor Party, and I'd ask that he withdraw and apologise.
I was simply repeating what Mr Mallard had said about the Prime Minister.
Order. Look, I never heard it, but all members here are honourable and their word is their bond, and if the member did use an unparliamentary term, I'd require him to stand and withdraw.
Why are different standards applied to members other than the special case, Mr Mallard?
The member will be seated. He's now challenging my ruling, and I'm asking the member, all members are honourable, their word is their bond, and if he used an unparliamentary term, I'm asking him to stand and withdraw. Please.
I withdraw.
Thank you very much.
Chair.
I call the Honourable Minister Tony Ryle.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'm pleased to take a call in this very important debate. This legislation is more constrained, it's more transparent, and it offers more scrutiny than the previous legislation. And I want to particularly acknowledge the Prime Minister's comments earlier in this debate, where he talks about the fact that many people have been unduly alarmed because of the scaremongering associated with this legislation. There are always people in our communities who think their activities are of such interest that some government agency is monitoring what they are doing. And we saw that from a number of people before the Select Committee that considered this bill. But let's be quite clear here. This bill comes to the Parliament because the legislation that was introduced in the 2000s was not fit for purpose, it was not sufficiently focused, and it created a level of legal uncertainty that requires the government to take the legislation that it has and the action that it has. And I do also want to associate myself with the comments that the Deputy Prime Minister made. Actually, it is an indictment on the opposition. You know when an opposition party is ready for government when they behave like a government in waiting. A government in waiting that accepts that not only do they have a responsibility to secure their own election, they have a responsibility to the security of the realm, and they have a responsibility to take these issues seriously and responsibly and to act in the better interests of the nation and allow the politics to be run by the smaller parties that people expect will behave on the fringe, as the Green Party has, but the Labor Party, as the party that introduced this legislation in the 2000s, as the party that had Prime Ministers who acted under the authority of that legislation, would have taken a far more responsible role. And I think the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister Helen Clark, was right in her subtle criticism of the Labor Party when she appeared on television, when she alerted the nation to the fact that these powers were needed. These powers were needed, and she understood that. And actually, I think senior members of the opposition are aware of those issues. They are aware of their responsibilities, but this tension and playing between the parties of the left meant that those who wanted to play politics in Labor got to have the greater say in the position that that party opposite had. So this government is responding to the concerns raised in the Kitteridge report, to the issues that were raised before it in the Select Committee, and that's why we've brought this legislation forward. And it really gives the powers to the GCSB, or the GCSB can act under this legislation in three key areas: information assurance and cybersecurity, foreign intelligence, and thirdly, assisting other agencies. And I'd just like to go through each of those. Information assurance and cybersecurity. This is to giving the power the GCSB to render assistance to government agencies and key private sector infrastructures in order to protect their information infrastructures. It's not about delving into the information, it's about protecting their structures. And I think, as the Prime Minister has said, it's a more of a swept-up version of Norton antivirus that we all have on our computers at home. It's not filtering, it's not sort of reading all our emails, it is protecting our infrastructure, protecting our communication systems from malware and outside attack. And that's the GCSB responsibility there in terms of that area. The GCSB has specialist skills in this area that can help protect departments and companies, and what's more, we've made it very clear in this bill that we now have principles and descriptions of how those responsibilities should operate, and that's a new adding to this bill. So the cybersecurity is about protecting people's information infrastructure, protecting their secrets. It's got nothing to do with spying. And in fact, if any action needs to be taken with respect to that overseas attack coming into a New Zealand's computer system, and we need to access that system in order to help protect infrastructure, then any of that needs to involve warrants. And that is very, very important. Secondly, as the Prime Minister has detailed, he will have a two-step process with respect to those warrants if there's any necessary part of that, and I think that's really good. The second function of the GCSB is with respect to foreign intelligence, and that is the largest part of the agency's work, and that's very much set out in the purposes of the bill and makes it very clear that the agency's purpose is on foreign intelligence, on foreigners, not New Zealanders, and it's very restricted and very clear in that legislation. The third function of the GCSB is to use its centre of skill in this area to assist other government agencies. Now, in the previous legislation, it just said other government agencies, and that's actually very wide. But as a result of the Select Committee process, members on this side have narrowed that down to 3 agencies: the Police, the New Zealand Security Intelligence Service, and the New Zealand Defence Force. We've restricted that ability to assist other agencies down to those 3. And here's the rub. The GCSB cannot act or support those agencies under its own volition. It needs the warrant of those other agencies to be legitimately attained for them to provide support and assistance. So they can do nothing in support unless one of those 3 agencies is acting under their lawful powers, and then the GCSB must give that information to the retention of those other agencies. That information goes to those other agencies because the GCSB is acting in support of those agencies. They are restricted by the mandate of the warrants of those other 3 agencies. They cannot go outside the mandate of the warrant of those 3 agencies. This means we don't need to have the specialist capacity in GCSB replicated in 3 other agencies. In a nation the size of ours, 4.5 million people, we should not expect to have to go through the expense, and in fact I don't know whether we'd even be able to replicate the skill of the GCSB in those particular areas in those other agencies. So it's pretty clear this bill is about greater transparency, greater restraint and greater scrutiny. It does provide for annual appearances before the committee, the Intelligence Security Committee, reports on the use of their powers and the various warrants. It now gives the Inspector General of the Security Intelligence Agencies additional people that he can consult with. We never had that before, and so that's going to be very important as well. Can I also raise this issue of metadata? This bill goes further than the members opposite think. It does not allow any differentiation between metadata or other information. That's not allowed to make that separation because that's in the bill. The bill defines communication in such a way that says communication is what it is, it doesn't allow for metadata. Metadata cannot be separate. There is no ability for them to get metadata and not communications without a warrant, because the only thing they can get is communication with a warrant. So that includes metadata. So they need a warrant. And all the stuff that they can go and get the metadata, and I can understand people's concerns with all the stuff that's been going on in this chamber about it, but they cannot access metadata without a warrant, because it's not separated from communication. Mr. Speaker, I think this is a very important piece of legislation. It tidies up the issues raised in the Kitteridge report. It does provide greater transparency. It does provide for greater scrutiny, and it does provide greater restraint on the powers of these authorities and their granting officers than there previously was.
Member's time has expired.
Mr. Speaker,
I call Dennis